A missing next public prefix caused a production outage. The variable was undefined in the browser. The article uses Turborepo v1 pipeline syntax, pipeline. In Turborepo v2, release 2024, the key is renamed to tasks, and the structure is slightly different. If using v2, replace pipeline with tasks and adjust depends on to depends on, still valid, but note that outputs and inputs are now under each task directly. The example in the production incident section already shows v2 syntax, which may cause confusion. The article mentions turbo prune, but doesn't show a complete CI step. Here's a concrete GitHub Actions step that prunes the monorepo to only the target app and its dependencies, then builds it. This is essential for fast, minimal deployments. The article warns about environment variables not invalidating cache, but a common production issue is that next public variables are baked into the JavaScript bundle at build time. If you use remote caching, a cache hit may serve a build with stale public variables. Always include relevant env vars in turbo.json's global dependencies or use force after env changes. Let's break down Next.js Monorepo with Turborepo, enterprise architecture, how it works, and the exact mistake behind that failure. A Next.js Monorepo with Turborepo is a single repository containing multiple Next.js applications and shared packages orchestrated by Turborepo's build system. It enforces consistent tooling, enables code sharing, and optimizes build pipelines for enterprise-scale projects. Managing multiple Next.js applications independently leads to duplicated code, inconsistent dependencies, and fragile cross-project coordination. A monorepo consolidates all projects into one repository, enabling shared tooling and atomic changes. Turborepo adds intelligent caching and parallel execution, reducing CI times from hours to minutes. Start by scaffolding a Turborepo monorepo with the with Next.js example. This creates the basic structure with apps and packages folders. Turborepo's core is the pipeline configuration in turbo.json. It defines task dependencies and caching rules. For example, build depends on build upstream packages built first, and test depends on build. Turborepo caches outputs based on file contents, environment variables, and dependency graphs. Here's a typical pipeline configuration. The build task depends on upstream builds, specifies outputs and inputs for caching. Test depends on build, lint has no outputs, and dev is not cached. Make sure to list all input globs to avoid stale caches. A typical enterprise monorepo has apps for Next.js applications and packages for shared libraries. Each app is a standalone Next.js project. Shared packages include UI components, utilities, and configuration. Use TypeScript project references for type checking across packages. Here's a package, JSON for a shared UI package. It uses scoped naming, points to a dist folder, and has its own build script. This package can be imported by any app in the monorepo. Consistency across the monorepo starts with a shared tsconfig, JSON base. Extend it in each app or package using extends. Use strict mode, enable composite for project references, and set declaration map for better editor support. This base config sets strict mode, enables declarations, and composite for project references. Each workspace extends this and overrides as needed. Enforce code style across the monorepo with a shared ESLint config that extends Next.core Web Vitals and Turbo. Use Prettier for formatting, integrated via ESLint config Prettier. Run linting in CI with Turbo run lint to check all workspaces. This root ESLint config extends recommended presets and turns off a few noisy rules. Add a Prettier RC at the root with shared settings like single quote and trailing comma. Shared UI components should be built as a separate package using React and TypeScript. Export components as named exports from an index file. Use NextDynamic for code splitting in apps, but avoid it in the shared package to keep bundle optimization at the app level. Here's a simple button component. It accepts a variant prop and applies appropriate classes. If this component used hooks or event handlers, it would need a useClient directive. Each Next.js app has its own env local for secrets and env for defaults. For shared variables, create a env file at the root and reference it in each app's next. Config.js using the env option. Turborepo can pass environment variables via turbo.json's global env to invalidate cache when they change. This next, config.js loads a root env file and exposes Next public API URL to the browser. Only prefix variables with Next public if they need to be exposed to the browser. Secret variables should only be used in server-side code. Use just for unit tests in packages and apps with that testing library React for UI components. For integration tests across apps, use Playwright or Cypress. Run tests with Turbo Run Test to leverage caching. Keep test files co-located with source files. Here's a unit test for the button component. It renders the button and checks that it has the correct class for the primary variant. Optimize CI by using Turborepo's remote caching. In GitHub Actions, set up a cache key based on Turbo, JSON, and lockfill. Use Turbo Run Lint Test build to run all checks. For deployment, use Turbo Prune to create a minimal deployable artifact. This GitHub Actions workflow checks out code, sets up node, caches node modules, installs dependencies, and runs Turbo Lint, test, and build with remote caching enabled via Turbo Token and Turbo Team. Use npm workspaces for dependency management. Keep shared dependencies like React and Next.js at the root package, JSON to ensure single version. For package-specific dependencies, declare them in the packages package, JSON. Use overrides to force a single version when conflicts arise. This root package, JSON, defines workspaces and overrides to force consistent versions of React and Next.js across all packages. Deploy each Next.js app independently. For Vercel, connect the Monorepo and configure each app's root directory. Use Turbo Prune to generate a minimal deployment folder. For Docker, create a multi-stage build that copies only the pruned workspace. This Docker file uses Turbo Prune to extract only the admin app and its dependencies, then builds and creates a minimal runtime image. This reduces image size significantly. Use structured logging with Pinot or Winston in API routes and server components. Aggregate logs using a service like Datadog or Grafana. For error tracking, integrate Sentry with each Next.js app. Include a package field in logs to trace the source. Here's an API route that uses Pinot for structured logging. The logger is named Admin API to distinguish it from other apps. Use Prettier for local development and JSON output for production. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. A hotfix was merged and deployed, but the bug was still live. The deploy had served a stale build from Turborepo's remote cache. The changed file wasn't part of the task's declared inputs, so Turbo saw a cache hit and skipped the rebuild. The root cause was incomplete inputs/outputs in Turbo.json. The Turbo.json pipeline for the build task had incomplete inputs, so a changed file outside the declared globs caused a cache hit and a stale build was deployed. The fix is to declare complete inputs and outputs so the cache signature actually reflects what the task depends on. When in doubt, widen inputs. A cache miss is cheap. A poisoned cache is an outage. Here's the corrected Turbo.json with comprehensive inputs. If you change a file that isn't covered by the inputs glob, Turborepo won't invalidate the cache. This can lead to stale builds being served as successful. Always explicitly list all input globs that the task depends on. We had a production outage because a shared env file was missing a next public prefix, causing the variable to be undefined in the browser. Always prefix public variables correctly. This is the exact mistake from the incident. The inputs only include tsx and ts files, so changes to next, config, JS, or package, JSON would not invalidate the cache. Always include all files that affect the build output. If your shared component uses hooks or event handlers, it must be a client component. Add use client at the top of the file. Otherwise, keep it as a server component for better performance. We forgot to set Turbo Token in CI once, and builds took 20 minutes instead of 2. Now we have a CI check that verifies remote caching is enabled. This updated configuration includes all source files, next, config files, and package, JSON in the inputs. The outputs exclude the next cache directory to avoid caching internal build artifacts. To diagnose cache issues, use turbo run build dry to see what would be cached. Use force to bypass cache and force a rebuild. Verify your turbo, JSON inputs and outputs cover all necessary files. Ensure turbo token is set for remote caching. Let's run through some common interview questions. What is Turborepo and how does it differ from NX? Turborepo focuses on simplicity and caching, while NX offers more features like code generation. Turborepo is easier to set up and integrate seamlessly with Next.js. How does Turborepo's remote caching work? It caches task outputs based on file contents, env-vars, and dependency graphs. Cache is shared across CI runners via Versal or simple storage service, making cold builds as fast as incremental ones. What is the purpose of Turbo Prune? It creates a minimal subset of the monorepo containing only the specified workspace and its dependencies, used for deployment to reduce artifact size. And a few frequently asked questions. Can I use PNPM with Turborepo? Yes, PNPM is recommended for its strict dependency resolution and disk efficiency. Set package manager in root package, JSON, and configure PNPM workspace, YAML. How do I share code between apps without a monorepo? You can publish shared packages to a private NPM registry, but this adds versioning overhead and makes atomic changes impossible. A monorepo is simpler for internal sharing. What are the downsides of a monorepo? Monorepos can become large, slowing down Git operations and IDE performance. They require discipline in code ownership and may cause merge conflicts. Let's recap the key takeaways. Centralizes code and tooling for multiple Next.js apps. Proper pipeline config and remote caching cut CI times. Shared TypeScript, ESLint, and UI packages enforce consistency. Prune before deployment. Use structured logging for debugging. Ready to go deeper? Up next, Introduction to Node.js, then Node.js modules and CommonJS, then Express.js framework and REST API with Express.js. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at TheCodeForge.io.